The presentation is entitled Main Outcomes and Decisions, and this is a 35-slide presentation that will give overview of 72 decisions taken at the conferences of the parties in 2015 May. So it will be a little bit long and a lot of text reading, so please do download or receive the presentation file after this webinar so that you can use it as an information resource. The three COPs, as indicated in the introduction, those were held back-to-back during 2 weeks with joint sessions on cross-cutting issues in 2015 May. The theme of the meeting was From Science to Action, Working for a Safer Tomorrow, as agreed with the Bureau of the Three Conference of the Parties. There were around 1,200 participants, including 169 country parties representing the delegations with 13 UN organizations, 5 IGOs, 5 regional centers, 84 NGOs, and 19 industry associations. Science Fair was organized by the Secretariat during the COPs for 3 days, which highlighted scientific basis of the BRS conventions. And there were dozens of events organized during this fair. Now, next is there. Sorry, skipped one slide. All right, follow up to the meetings. After the meeting until now, the Secretariat is working very hard with the conference services to publish the report of the meeting, along with the follow-up letters that include the information requests and nominations based on the decisions taken during the COPs. The follow-up letter for the Basel Convention was just sent out to parties on Tuesday this week, and the Rotterdam and Stockholm letters will follow very soon. So that is why the webinar that is presented this month will be very helpful for the participants to obtain the fast-track information about outcome of the meeting, as the report is still not available on the website, but will be issued as English advanced version in mid-July, and language versions in mid-October would be the target month for making it available on the website. So during the 3 conferences of the parties held back-to-back, there were joint issues addressed in the first 2 days of the 2 weeks meeting. Those included POPs waste, technical assistance, financial resources, compliance, international cooperation, program of work and budget, venue, date, next meetings, and other matters. That includes MOU with the UNEP and FAO, admission of observers, and so on. Now I will introduce the main outcomes on joint issues, starting with technical assistance. The decisions on technical assistance were taken by Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention COP, which all welcomed technical assistance program and requested Secretariat to implement it. Also, they invited parties to provide information on needs or availability of technical assistance and technology transfer. Under the decisions of Basel Convention and Stockholm Convention on regional centers, the conferences of the parties noted that the centers had been evaluated and that their performance had been noted. And Stockholm Convention COP endorsed all Stockholm Convention regional centers for another period of 4 years. Secretariat was requested to prepare an evaluation report of centers and to consider possible adjustment on the evaluation methodology. The centers were also invited to undertake mercury-related activities under the conventions to provide information about it. The second main outcome on joint issues covers financial resources. The three conventions took financial related decision on implementation of the integrated approach, which joined the UNEA in welcoming an integrated approach to the financing of chemicals and waste, emphasizing the importance of implementing its three components. Then it also welcomed the UNEA resolution that established a special program and looked forward to early start of its operations. They also welcomed that according to the terms of reference of the special program, the Executive Secretary may participate as an observer in the meetings of the Executive Board of the special program. There are a couple of decisions specific to Stockholm Convention relating to the financial mechanism. In those decisions, the Conference of the Parties to the Stockholm Convention adopted terms of reference for the assessment of funding needed by countries to implement the Convention in 2018-2022 to be carried out during the 8th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The COP also adopted terms of reference for the 4th review, which is to be carried out during the 8th meeting. Stockholm COP also took note of the report on implementation, welcomed GEF activity report, requested new reports to be developed for the next COP. Then it welcomed GEF chemicals and waste focal area and strategy, and encouraged GEF to continue to enhance synergies in its activities. It also requested the Secretariat to identify possible elements of guidance from the Stockholm Convention to the GEF that also address relevant priorities of Basel Convention and Rotterdam Convention. Another key outcome on joint issue includes program of work and budget. The decision on budget approved the budget of each convention for the biennium 2016-2017 at 0 nominal growth. And the conferences of the parties invited the Executive Director to provide information on implications of establishing a single account for staff costs and a single joint general trust fund to Bureau, and make proposals on changes to financial rules for consideration by the next COP. Also decided new measures to be applied to parties that are in arrears for 4 or more years. Under the same agenda item, the enhancing cooperation among conventions was discussed, and the conferences of the parties adopted the terms of reference for the review of synergies arrangements to be carried out by an independent assessor. The conferences of the parties requested the Secretariat to submit the report on the review and to make proposals in response to this review for consideration by the 2017 COPs. Now, until here, the joint issues covered all Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions. And on this slide introduces the outcome of the discussion on POPs waste, which covers Basel and Stockholm conventions. Under the Basel Convention, the Conference of the Parties adopted 7 technical guidelines on POPs waste. And it also decided to undertake a review of provisional low POP content values set out in the guidelines before the next Basel Convention Conference of the Parties. It also decided to update technical guidelines for the 3 newly listed persistent organic pollutants that were included in the Stockholm Convention. I will introduce those 3 newly listed POPs in the later slides under the Stockholm Convention's outcome. And for the Stockholm part, the POPs waste decision welcomed the Basel Convention's decision adopting 7 technical guidelines on POPs waste and invited the Basel Convention to update technical guidelines for the new listed POPs. And Stockholm Convention experts were invited to participate in updating the technical guidelines on POPs waste. for further development. Another joint issue addressed, introduced during the joint session of the conferences of the parties, was the compliance for Rotterdam Convention and the Stockholm Convention. The Rotterdam Convention decision indicated that the conference of the parties decided to consider further at 8th meeting the procedures and mechanisms on compliance using as a basis the draft text in the annex to the decision. It also invited the Rotterdam Convention Bureau to facilitate intersessional consultations among all parties to promote a policy dialogue on outstanding issues. With regard to the Stockholm Convention compliance mechanism, the Conference of the Parties noted that the negotiations had not yielded a result that the draft text contained in the annex to decision are entirely bracketed. It also decided to consider further at 8th meeting the procedures and mechanisms in compliance using as a basis the draft text contained in the annex to the decision. Similarly to the Rotterdam Convention, the Conference of the Parties invited the Stockholm Convention Bureau to facilitate intersessional consultations among all parties to promote a policy dialogue on outstanding issues. Then the BRS decisions related to international cooperation, which the Executive Secretary was requested to inform process to define post-2015 development agenda about relevance of conventions, and requested enhanced cooperation within and outside chemical cluster. For the clearinghouse mechanism, the Conference of the Parties took note of the joint clearinghouse mechanism strategy and invited comments on strategy which is to be revised for 2017 COPs. The Secretariat was requested to provide access to thematic information in priority areas. Still, other joint issues related decisions are on science to action, which requested the development of a roadmap to further engage parties and stakeholders to enhance science-based action in the implementation of the conventions. With regard to the venue and date of next meetings, it was decided that the next meeting will be held back-to-back with one-day high-level segment and also regional preparatory meetings. And with regard to the decisions on draft MOU, it decided to wait for the UNEP MEA Multilateral Environmental Agreement task team to finalize its work before taking a final decision on the MOUs. I think that was it for the joint issues related outcome. And now I move on to the main outcomes of the Basel Convention COP12. Let's start with follow-up to the country-led initiative, which consists of 3 parts of the decision. First one related to ban amendment. So the Conference of the Parties acknowledged new ratifications, and Secretariat was requested to continue to provide assistance to parties upon request. For the environmentally sound management guidelines, the Conference of the Parties adopted the work program of the expert working group on environmentally sound management, and it requested each regional group to nominate 1 expert with expertise and knowledge in the field of waste prevention and minimization. We welcomed a set of draft practical manuals and fact sheets and invited parties and others to submit comments on them. And it requested the expert working group to revise the set of draft practical manuals and fact sheets and to submit them to OEWG 10, the open-ended working group meeting to be held in 2016 and at the 13th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The third part of this country-led initiative decision was on legal clarity. The Conference of the Parties took note of the draft glossary of terms and related terms and decided that this shall be the basis for further work. It invited a small intersessional working group on legal clarity to continue its work to prepare a revised version of the glossary and related terms. And OEWG 10 is to finalize the glossary and related terms and prepare a draft decision on these matters for COP13. It also decided to initiate a process for the review of Annexes 1, 3, and 4 and related aspects of Annex 6 towards the consistent interpretation of terminology. The next decision relates to technical guidelines on environmentally sound management of mercury waste. The Conference of the Parties adopted the updated technical guidelines and requested the Secretariat to disseminate it to parties and others, including the Interim Secretariat of the Minamata Convention. The Conference of the Parties invited parties and others to use the guidelines and to submit comments on their experience in so doing and on any developments regarding methods for disposal of mercury waste. Another technical guidelines adopted was the e-waste technical guidelines, which was on an interim basis, and acknowledged the need to look further into the guidelines on the distinction between waste and non-waste, and agreed to include the further elaboration of work on this issue in the work program of the OEWG, so that it can prepare a draft revised guidelines for consideration by COP13. The Conference of the Parties invited parties and others to provide comments on certain issues related to the above-mentioned work. The information about the technical guidance on POPs waste I have already addressed as part of the joint issue outcome. Here, my next slide shows Cartagena Declaration on the prevention, minimization, and recovery of hazardous waste and other wastes. The Conference of the Parties adopted the roadmap for action on the implementation of the Cartagena Declaration. And it decided to mandate the expert working group on environmentally sound management to develop guidance to assist parties in developing efficient strategies for achieving prevention and minimization of generation of wastes. The next decision was on national reporting. The Conference of the Parties adopted the revised format of the National Reporting Questionnaire and decided to extend the mandate of the small intersessional working group on national reporting to develop a user manual for the electronic reporting system and the revised format in the 6 official UN languages. It also decided to mandate open-ended working group to agree on a list of waste streams for which additional practical guidance on the development of inventories should be developed, based on the report prepared by the Secretariat. Then the decision related to Implementation and Compliance Committee extended the amendment to paragraph 9C of the Terms of Reference of the mechanism until 14th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. And it discontinued the legal framework program, adopted the methodological guide for development of inventories, the revised guide to control system, and the updated manual for the implementation of the convention. The Conference of the Parties also approved work program of the committee for 2016-2017 and elected 10 new ICC members to serve until the close of the 14th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. So now the next decision is on national legislation, notifications, enforcement of the convention, and efforts to combat illegal traffic. The Conference of the Parties encouraged parties to provide the Secretariat with text of national legislation and other measures to implement and enforce the Convention, and invited parties to share information on best practices in preventing and combating illegal traffic, and to report confirmed cases of illegal traffic. It also requested the Secretariat to prepare recommendations on possible synergies between the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions in preventing illegal traffic and trade. Other decisions taken under the Basel Convention included the work program and operation of the open-ended working group, by which the Conference of the Parties decided that the next open-ended working group will be of 4 days, with 3 days of interpretation to be provided flexibly by the Executive Secretary. And on implementation of decision on the enlargement of the scope of the trust fund, and PACE, and creating innovative solutions for the environmentally sound management of household wastes, enforce environmentally sound dismantling of ships, cooperation between the Basel Convention and the International Maritime Organization. So those are other decisions also taken under the Basel Convention. And with this, I will now move on to the main outcomes of the Rotterdam Convention, COP7. The first listed here is the amendment to Annex 3 to the Convention. The Conference of the Parties adopted the decision on listing of metamidophos under pesticide category in Annex 3 to the Convention. The amendment will enter into force on 15 September 2015. The Conference of the Parties also approved the draft decision guidance document forwarded by the Chemical Review Committee. There was no consensus reached on listing of the following 4 chemicals. The first 2 are the severely hazardous pesticide formulation, fenthion, ultra-low volume formulations at or above 640 gram active ingredient per liter, and liquid formulations containing paraquat dichloride at or above 276 gram per liter, corresponding to paraquat ion at or above 200 gram per liter. So those were severely hazardous pesticide formulations. And trichlorophon, this was under pesticide category. And lastly, chrysotal asbestos under industrial category. All those 4 chemicals will be considered again at the ACE meeting of the Conference of the Parties in 2017. In addition to the listing of chemicals decision, the Conference of the Parties took decision to establish an intersessional work on the process of listing chemicals in Annex 3 to the Rotterdam Convention. The objective is to review cases when the Conference of Parties was unable to reach consensus on listing, and to develop options for improving effectiveness of the process, develop proposals for enabling improved information flow that support the prior informed consent procedure for those chemicals. For this work, the Conference of the Parties invited parties to consider serving as lead country or the Secretariat to facilitate the intersessional work, which will be underpinned by a workshop subject to availability of resources. For the Chemical Review Committee, the Conference of the Parties elected the Chemical Review Committee Chair, which is Mr. Jürgen Helbig from Spain, and adopted a list of 14 parties which will nominate new CRC members. The Conference of the Parties also welcomed the guidance when a chemical under the Rotterdam Convention consideration is a persistent organic pollutant. Also welcomed Handbook of Working Procedures and Policy Guidance for the Chemical Review Committee. The decision RC2/2015 2 includes the process for drafting decision guidance document, and the section B.26 of this decision was amended in order to be consistent with the amendment introduced at COP6 by decision RC 6/3. So this was amendment for consistency purpose. For the decision related to status of implementation of the convention, on general issues, the Conference of the Parties requested the Secretariat to carry out survey on the use of various definitions for term pesticides and prepare a document to inform parties. For activities to increase notifications of final regulatory action, the Secretariat was requested to collect specific information that may assist parties in preparing notifications of FRA, provide assistance to parties to increase notifications of FRAs, and proposals for the listing of severely hazardous pesticide formulations. Also to carry out the survey on the final regulatory actions adopted by parties. For the proposal on ways of exchanging information on exports and export notifications, the Secretariat was requested to provide assistance to parties upon request in implementing paragraph 2C of Articles 11 and 12 of the Convention, and to facilitate the exchange of information on exports and export notifications. Then lastly, the main outcome of the Stockholm Convention, COP7, also start with the decisions related to amendments to the Convention. The Stockholm Convention Conference of the Parties adopted decisions to list 3 new chemicals, listing of hexachlorobutadiene in Annex A without specific exemptions, listing of pentachlorophenol salts and esters in Annex A with specific exemptions for production and use of pentachlorophenol for utility poles and cross arms, and listing of polychlorinated naphthalenes in Annex A with specific exemptions for production and use of those chemicals as intermediates in production of polyfluorinated naphthalenes, and also this chemical in Annex C. The Conference of the Parties also adopted the decision to undertake further work on hexachlorobutadiene, and it requested the POPs Review Committee to further evaluate hexachlorobutadiene on the basis of the newly available information in relation to its listing in Annex C. The POPs Review Committee is to make a recommendation to the Conference of the Parties for its consideration at the ACE meeting on whether to list this chemical in Annex C. The next on the list is the decision on exemptions. The Conference of the Parties took note that as there are no longer any parties registered for the 6 types of specific exemptions for PFOS salts and PFOSs, this is perfluorooctane sulfonated salts and perfluorooctane sulfonyl fluoride, no new registrations may be made with respect to them. For DDT, the Conference of the Parties concluded that DDT may still be needed in some countries, and it endorsed key elements of the roadmap for development of DDT alternatives and invited UNEP to take lead in its implementation. It also adopted the list of countries to nominate members to DDT expert group. For polychlorinated biphenyls, the Conference of the Parties encouraged parties to intensify efforts to eliminate PCB and meet the 2025 and 2028 goals set by the Convention. The Secretariat was requested to consolidate the assessment report on efforts made by parties to eliminate PCB and make it available to Effectiveness Evaluation Committee and at the ACE meeting of the Conference of the Parties. For brominated diethyl ethers, BDEs, the Conference of the Parties adopted revised format and decided to use it for evaluation at the ACE meeting of the Conference of the Parties and every second COP thereafter. The Secretariat was requested to continue to support the process provided in decision SC6/3 to enable the conference of the parties to evaluate the brominated diphenyl ethers at the 8th meeting of the conference of the parties. For PFOS, its salts, and PFOS-F, the conference of the parties concluded that parties may need to continue to produce and/or use PFOS, its salts, and PFOS-F for acceptable purposes as provided in Annex B. It also requested the Secretariat to revise the format for collecting information on alternatives based on the comments provided by the Conference of the Parties and the POPs Review Committee. It amended the schedule of the process for the evaluation of PFOS, salts, and PFOS-F, and decided to undertake the evaluation at the 9th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The Conference of the Parties invited parties to transmit to the Secretariat information related to the interpretation and application of Article 4 for consideration at the 8th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. On toolkit for identification and quantification of releases of dioxins, furans, and other POPs, the Conference of the Parties requested toolkit experts to continue their work for the ongoing review of the toolkit and encourage parties to use the toolkit. Then on best available techniques and best environmental practice, which is BAT-BEP, the Conference of the Parties adopted work plan for the review and update of the BAT-BEP guidelines and guidance. And it requested BAT-BEP experts to continue working on ongoing review of guidelines and guidance. And Conference of the Parties requested toolkit and BAT-BEP experts to develop joint terms of reference for synergistically considering aspects relevant to releases from an unintentional production and BAT and BEP. For the implementation plans, the Conference of the Parties took note of 3 revised guidance documents and encouraged parties to use them when developing or updating national implementation plans. Secretariat was requested to develop a new guidance on inventory newly listed POPs. For the POPs Review Committee, the Conference of the Parties elected the POPs Review Committee Chair, Ms. Estefania Moreira from Brazil, and it adopted a list of 14 parties to nominate new POPs Review Committee members. It welcomed the guidance when a chemical under Rotterdam Convention consideration is a POP, and guidance on possible impact of climate change on work of POPs Review Committee. For national reporting, the Conference of the Parties took note with concern of low level of reporting and requested the Secretariat to further refine draft strategy to enhance reporting under the Convention. Secretariat was also requested to update reporting format for the newly listed POPs and improve electronic system. On effectiveness evaluation, the Conference of the Parties elected 10 members of the committee and invited parties to designate experts for inclusion in the roster of experts to provide support to the committee. The Secretariat was requested to collect and compile information and prepare preliminary analysis of available information. Then 2 more to go. The Global Monitoring Plan decision. The Conference of the Parties welcomed updated guidance on Global Monitoring Plan and encouraged parties to use it. It also requested Global Coordination Group to develop draft Global Monitoring Report and make it available to EE Committee. For procedure under paragraph 2b of Article 3, the Conference of the Parties